Recently, I was asked by a middle school teacher to create a homeschool communication log. And as we were discussing the log, we talked about the important types of things to include, activities that were happening at school that the student would be able to share at home. But we also talked about wanting to make it kind of fun and also age appropriate. Now, we all know that middle schoolers primarily communicate via text with one another, and a huge part of texting is the use of emojis, and hence this idea for an emoji log was built. You'll see that we've got the day for the student broken down into 4 different components. So there's the start of the day, the morning block, and then it has the lunch block and the afternoon block. For each of these blocks, we're recording where activities are happening, what's happening. A student can choose to talk about just one thing that happened during that block or everything that happened during that block. They can check them off, they can circle them, whatever makes sense to them. We talk about maybe tools that were used to help pay attention, and then bringing in this idea of emotion and how they experience that activity, giving them a chance to reflect on what it felt like to participate in that activity. So again, there are 2 pages for school going home, the starting my day, the morning block, then the second page, lunch block and afternoon block. You'll see at the bottom of the page, there's also a place for a plan for after school, where we're really trying to bridge that context for the child, that they kind of understand that they've got a whole day, and they can be thinking about home when they're at school and vice versa. The third page of the support is a support that can be used at home, almost in a homework sort of format, to be able to share information back to school. So this is just a single page. Here we have 2 blocks, one for after school, that same format, the where, what, maybe if their tools were used and how they felt during that time period, and then also a dinner block. And then a plan for school tomorrow, what they're anticipating happening at school tomorrow. Again, the idea is really, if we think within the context of the CERTS curriculum, we're being able to comment on actions and events. We're being able to share information about past events, and we're providing a structure for students who are able to do that, which sounds all well and good. And I took this and I shared it with Jacqueline, and she looked at me, and if she were here right now, she would be like, oh, we decided that it really needed to be autism leveled up. And so that's just what we did collaboratively. And she'll tell you a little bit about the thought process about why we chose to do that. But you'll see we've maintained that same basic structure, with the schedule, where, what, but then we've brought in that energy rating. We brought in the overall energy that was needed for the activity or in that block, and the overall energy that child or that individual, that middle schooler, was feeling at that time. And then tools they used potentially to regulate their energy if there was a mismatch, or to maintain their energy at just the right level. So again, that structure's the same: starting my day, the morning block, lunch block, afternoon block, and we've got a place for plans for after school. Again, that idea of bridging home and school and sharing information and commenting on past events, but doing it in the context of regulation and how actively engaged they were throughout their day. The next part of this is, again, that home to school piece, and you'll see the structure is the same. We're still really focused on the energy piece here and helping that student start to recognize and reflect on their energy, as well as have words to be able to talk about it with other people, and then start to problem solve strategies that they've used. So we basically have 2 different tools that we created. One which is with the simple emojis that we're also familiar with from our keyboards on our phones and everything else. And then this second kind of autism leveled up version, which really focuses on the energy and helps really bring that to the forefront and helps highlight that as piece of active engagement, and how students are starting to navigate their day being conscious about that. So without further ado, I'm going to let Jacqueline talk a little bit about her experience and her thoughts around these homeschool communication logs and leveling them up.
My reaction was no, just no, or ew, no, something along those lines, because I'm biased in that I really value my privacy, and I find it very jarring and strange when someone asks me about my day, and it is not something that comes to mind to share that kind of information, and nor is it a desire of mine to share that kind of information. So for me, the emoji log and talking about what I did during the day and how I felt about it on top of that in terms of emotion was really just awful. Um, and Amy informed me that this is something in schools today that is often mandated or required, this kind of communication between home and school. So I'm very pleased that if it has to be done, if it is truly required for the home and the school to communicate in this way, I love that this gives the autistic individual the chance not only to talk about what their energy level was, but also what was needed for the situation. It's a constant reminder for parents and teachers and anyone working with the autistic individual that it's not about being in a certain state. It's about being at a certain state or with a certain arousal in a context. So I do love that explicit reminder. And I love stripping away the emotional labels um, from this, especially because that can just become automatic where someone is just saying happy, good, great, everything went fine um, out of habit or just as a script or a routine. So I think this gives much more information and is far more helpful if the communication does have to happen. I also think that if you're not like me and you really do want to share this kind of information with your teachers or with your parents or with your siblings or friends, this gives a great structured form to be able to do that um, without having to use emotion words, and it's very logical. Um, you can talk about it in terms of I went for a run. The energy I needed was to be amped up or maxed out, and that's what I was. It's a very logical flow, and nothing has to be said beyond that. So if this information is something you do want to share, I think this gives a nice, straightforward, and predictable form to be able to do so. My one final caution is that if you're a parent or a teacher and this is not required, but you want this kind of information from an autistic person, um, make sure that they want to be sharing that information. Like I said, I really value my privacy and kind of being able to have my own um, inner thoughts and reflection on these kinds of things without people trying to pry the information out of me. So um, if they want to share it, perhaps this is a great form for them and it can work really well for you to communicate with them, but they may not want to. And so I would just urge that we don't force this upon autistic people just because it seems like a good way to get information out of them if you want to know.